and he lay unmoving, rigid as if dead, until it cried in shrill triumph and settled on his shoulder to pluck out his eyes. Then the vines stirred. They weren't strong, but their thorns sank into the flesh and it couldn't pull loose. Kreega toiled on down into the canyon while the vines pulled the hawk apart. Riordan loomed hugely against the darkening sky. He fired once, twice, the bullets humming wickedly close, but as shadows swept up from the depths, the Martian was covered. The man turned up his speech amplifier, and his voice rolled and boomed monstrously through the gathering night. Thunder such as dry Mars had not heard for millennia. "Score one for you, but it isn't enough. I'll find you." The sun slipped below the horizon, and night came down like a falling curtain. Through the darkness, Kreega heard the man laughing. The old rocks trembled with his laughter. Riordan was tired with the long chase and the niggling insufficiency of his oxygen supply. He wanted a smoke and hot food, and neither was to be had. Oh well, he'd appreciate the luxuries of life all the more when he got home, with the Martian skin. He grinned as he made camp. The little felt was a worthwhile quarry, that was for damn sure. He'd held out for 2 days now, in a little 10-mile circle of ground, and he'd even killed the hawk. But Riordan was close enough to him now so that the hound could follow his spoor, for Mars had no watercourses to break a trail, so it didn't matter. He lay watching the splendid night of stars. It would get cold before long, unmercifully cold, but his sleeping bag was a good enough insulator to keep him warm with the help of solar energy stored during the day by its Gergen cells. Mars was dark at night, its moons of little help. Phobos a hurtling speck, Deimos merely a bright star, dark and cold and empty. The rockhound had burrowed into the loose sand nearby, but it would raise the alarm if the Martian should come sneaking near their camp. Not that that was likely. He'd have to find shelter somewhere, too, if he didn't want to freeze. The bushes and the trees and the little furtive animals whispered a word he could not hear, chattered and gossiped on the wind about the Martian who kept himself warm with work. But he didn't understand that language, which was no language. Drowsily, Riordan thought of past hunts. The big game of Earth. Lion and tiger and elephant and buffalo, and sheep on the high sun-blazing peaks of the Rockies. Rainforests of Venus, and the coughing roar of a many-legged swamp monster crashing through the trees to the place where he stood waiting. Primitive throb of drums in a hot, wet night. Chant of beaters dancing around a fire. Scramble along the hell plains of Mercury with a swollen sun licking against his puny insulating suit. The grandeur and desolation of Neptune's liquid gas swamps, and the huge blind thing that screamed and blundered after him. But this was the loneliest and strangest and perhaps most dangerous hunt of all, and on that account the best. He had no malice toward the Martian. He respected the little being's courage as he respected the bravery of other animals he had fought. Whatever trophy he brought home from this chase would be well earned. The fact that his success would have to be treated discreetly didn't matter. He hunted less for the glory of it, though he had to admit he didn't mind the publicity, than for love. His ancestors had fought under one name or another. Viking, crusader, mercenary, rebel, patriot, whatever was fashionable at the moment. Struggle was in his blood, and in these degenerate days there was little to struggle against save what he hunted. Well, tomorrow. He drifted off to sleep. He woke in the short gray dawn, made a quick breakfast, and whistled his hound to heel. His nostrils dilated with excitement, a high, keen drunkenness that sang wonderfully within him. Today, maybe today. They had to take a roundabout way down into the canyon, and the hound cast about for an hour before he picked up the scent. Then the deep-voiced cry rose again, and they were off. More slowly now, for it was a cruel, stony trail. The sun climbed high as they worked along the ancient riverbeds. Its pale, chill light washed needle-sharp crags and fantastically painted cliffs, shale and sand and the wreck of geological ages. The low, harsh brush crunched under the man's feet, writhing and crackling its impotent protest. Otherwise it was still, a deep and taut and somehow waiting stillness. The hound shattered the quiet with an eager yelp and plunged forward, hot scent. Riordan dashed after him, trampling through dense bush, panting and swearing and grinning with excitement. Suddenly the brush opened underfoot. With a howl of dismay, the hound slid down the sloping wall of the pit it had covered. Riordan flung himself forward with tigerish swiftness, flat down on his belly, with one hand barely catching the animal's tail. The shock almost pulled him into the hole, too. He wrapped one arm around a bush that clawed at his helmet and pulled the hound back. Shaking, he peered into the trap. It had been well made, about 20 feet deep, with walls as straight and narrow as the sand would allow, and skillfully covered with brush. Planted in the bottom were 3 wicked-looking flint spears. Had he been a shade less quick in his reactions, he would have lost the hound and perhaps himself. He skinned his teeth in a wolf grin and looked around. The alley must have worked on it all night. Then he couldn't be far away, and he'd be very tired. As if to answer his thoughts, a boulder crashed down from the nearer cliff wall. It was a monster, but a falling object on Mars has less than half the acceleration it does on Earth. Riordan scrambled aside as it boomed into the place where he had been lying. "Come on!" he yelled, and plunged toward the cliff. For an instant a gray form loomed over the edge, hurled a spear at him. Riordan snapped a shot at it, and it vanished. The spear glanced off the tough fabric of his suit, and he scrambled up a narrow ledge to the top of the precipice. The Martian was nowhere in sight, but a faint red trail led into the rugged hill country. "Winged him, by God!" The hound was slower in negotiating the shale-covered trail. His own feet were bleeding when he came up. Riordan cursed him, and they set out again. They followed the trail for a mile or two, and then it ended. Riordan looked around the wilderness of trees and needles which blocked view in any direction. Obviously the owlie had backtracked and climbed up one of those rocks from which he could take a flying leap to some other point. But which one? Sweat, which he couldn't wipe off, ran down the man's face and body. He itched intolerably, and his lungs were raw from gasping at his dole of air. But still he laughed in gusty delight. What a chase! What a chase! Kreega lay in the shadow of a tall rock and shuddered with weariness. Beyond the shade, the sunlight danced in what to him was a blinding, intolerable dazzle, hot and cruel and life-hungry, hard and bright as the metal of the conquerors. It had been a mistake to spend priceless hours when he might have been resting, working on that trap. It hadn't worked, and he might have known that it wouldn't. And now he was hungry, and thirst was like a wild beast in his mouth and throat, and still they followed him. They weren't far behind now. All this day they had been dogging him. He had never been more than half an hour ahead. No rest, no rest. A devil's hunt through a tormented wilderness of stone and sand, and now he could only wait for the battle with an iron burden of exhaustion laid on him. The wound in his side burned. It wasn't deep, but it had cost him blood and pain and the few minutes of catnapping he might have snatched. For a moment the warrior Kreega was gone, and a lonely, frightened infant sobbed in the desert silence. "Why can't they let me alone?" A low, dusty green bush rustled. A sandrunner piped in one of the ravines. They were getting close. Wearily, Kreega scrambled up on top of the rock and crouched low. He had backtracked to it. They should by rights go past him toward his tower. He could see it from here, a low yellow ruin worn by the winds of millennia. There had only been time to dart in, snatch a bow and a few arrows and an axe. Pitiful weapons. The arrows could not penetrate the Earthman's suit when there was only a Martian's thin grasp to draw the bow, and even with a steel head the axe was a small